Hello everyone, welcome to the next Older Word review. I wasn't sure about doing this as a hybrid vlog slash review as I did with the, I was trying out a new format a while ago with the thoughtful theism review. That was a combination of a sort of personal vlog, and I somewhat talked about the actual book as well, although that video wasn't so much based on the content of that book, Andrew Union's book. For this one, I'm probably going to be talking more about the content and the concepts involved. So I'll probably consider it more of a review. In that format as well, the sort of hybrid creates some problems, particularly deciding where the cutoff point is. So I'll probably just consider everything a review. I'll just go back to considering everything a review, non-fiction and fiction as well. The whole conceit of this book is that since about the 1700s, there's been this shift from the scientific, analytical, rationalistic, empirical way of thinking. Sort of scientism, essentially. Scientism is the belief that we can only know things through sort of quantification of phenomena. We can only know things through. It even goes to the point where it's almost like a religion, where of course there are people out there who think that science is a sort of a unified whole. It can explain everything. But there's an other side of knowledge that Lachman argues comes from traditional religion, esoteric knowledge, sort of secret, hidden, or lost but not forgotten knowledge of the imagination, of the inner self, of inner knowing. And this is very much interesting for me. I got this book because of my shift from a sort of atheistic, deterministic, almost to scientism. My sort of worldview was sort of divested. Of course, I did find meaning in things, and I valued nature and whatnot, but it was almost divested of any sort of spiritual component, to the point where I felt like everything was just material and there was no meaning. I was almost happy to discover scientific advances or approaches that made the universe meaningless. Of course, the sort of humanistic sort of tenet is to create meaning for yourself. But I was always, which I do agree with, but I was always fine with being in a meaningless universe and not believing a god and all the rest. I've actually written an essay, sent it off to an online publication fairly recently about this journey, and I do wish I'd read this beforehand, because there's certain concepts that I wish I could have put into it, but that's in the past now anyway. This book really is about trying to regain a sense of inner knowledge, a sense of the utility of the imagination, a responsible use of the imagination. And when I say imagination, my conception of imagination is usually, of course, what most people think of imagination to be. That is the fantastical, the surreal, the otherworldly, the strange, sort of using concepts in the real world and changing them, shifting them. A tiger with 3 eyes wearing a crown, fantastical worlds. You're aware of what I'm trying to get at here. But the conceit of this book is that the imagination, true imagination, is something more pertinent to the world and to life. It's a sense of it's not mere fancy. It's not mere it's not getting lost. It's not wastefulness. It's not getting lost in just escapism. It's actually to do with a sort of combination of scientific mindset on one side, and on the other side, intuition. What I got from this book is it's sort of using self-knowledge and interaction with phenomena as they are, like the thing in itself, and participating. A big thing about this book is participation. The human consciousness participates with the world, it interacts with the world, and that is our imagination really participates with the world. It's a sort of Heisenberg principle where the observed is changed by the observer. So that's really what it's a more intellectual sense of imagination than just making up stories and getting lost in fancy and strange happenings and whatnot. So that is really what is meant. Imagination is a core aspect of being human, allowing us to fully experience ourselves in relation to the world and reality. Imagination plays a key role in creativity and innovation. In the 17th century, a new way of knowing the world and ourselves transformed human life, science. But its dominance came at a price, the marginalisation of another form of knowledge, imagination. Without this lost knowledge, the world is only half alive. The imagination, often sidelined as a way of escaping reality rather than coming to grips with it, is not merely a means of knowing reality, but also the means of bringing it into being. Lost knowledge of the imagination argues that in the strange new world of the 21st century, the need to regain this lost knowledge is more necessary than ever. This insightful and inspiring book calls for a rebalance of the influence between imagination and science. So it's not, so I've read some reviews that say that this book is anti-science and that it's, it denigrates science, but that's not the case. For the work of Owen Barfield, Goethe, Henry Corbin, Kathleen Raine and others, Gary Lachman introduces the reader to a canon of spiritual, philosophical and metaphysical teaching that offers a radically different way of understanding ourselves and the world. Most of this book is structured by looking into the lives, delving into the lives of certain people, Owen Barfield and Goethe, for example. Goethe was an interesting one. I felt almost connected to him in a way. I was aware of him. I've never read any of his works, like The Sorrows of Young Werther or anything like that. But reading his way of it's such a fascinating thing. Goethe was known as this great figure of science and art, sort of art world. He had this interesting way of looking at things. It's called like active seeing, where he was fully attentive to a particular phenomenon, a particular object, a particular event, which helped him see things more clearly. In this book, for me, this book feels like, if there are key words, it could be synthesis, it could be balance, because the whole point of this book is to not just constrict things through a sort of deterministic lens, a sort of just pure science, but to actually use the human imagination to things don't just happen through science. So, for example, there's a great case study where Newton, obviously, his whole study with prisms and light, he sort of constricted that experiment by looking at light in a dark room and doing a very controlled experiment, which is how science is done, of course. But it said in this book, I believe, that Goethe, he saw the same phenomenon, but as the thing in itself, through his own sort of being, and sort of as it exists, without these artificial constructions. This book deals mostly with figures that are trying to improve and develop what is called the learning of the imagination, sort of school of thought that sees the imagination as of vital importance, and that covers everyone from Kathleen Raine to Henry Corbin to Schiller to Husserl to Goethe, Jung, etc. Even covers Blake and Wordsworth and all the Romantics, of course, because the Romantics are obviously a big part of this. So the thing that sort of ties everything together, unfortunately, in this book, I struggle with it because it seems to indicate a very sort of anthropocentric and human-centric view of things, and I struggle with this because if in the past I viewed everything as material, humans are just another animal, the world exists outside of my consciousness, But a lot in this book, the whole point of this book is that human perception, their consciousness, almost in some way actually genuinely, truly creates reality. It's unfortunate because there's even, I can't remember who says it, but someone in this book, some learned figure says something to the effect of humans finish painting the world. Humans are what makes the world progress. And that is true in some sense. I struggle with it because it is anthropocentric. It's essentially saying that humans, the world is dependent on humans to sort of thrive and to sort of progress. But then I also have sympathies with Hegel and sort of a world soul and sort of synthesis to some greater purpose, some greater meaning in Teilhard's things like the Omega Point and all this sort of stuff that I've been reading about. I can sort of see some grand structure to everything, much, or at least more than I did in the past. But I find that in the broadest sense possible, I find that spirituality, being spiritual, is fundamentally linked to seeing humans as higher, because only humans can be spiritual. It's obvious, it's an obvious thing to say, but I find that difficult because it's as if my perception is more important than an animal's, and in some ways I can see why it would be, because I have more cognitive function in a sense. There's an interesting passage that summarizes this, and there's almost a sense where Lachman is disdaining my old worldview. So I'll read a little bit earlier on, just to give you a bit of context here. This relates to Kathleen Raine, one of these figures of the imagination. There was, she knew, a truth, a reality that was different from realism. This was the reality of what she came to call tradition, and which was rooted in the teachings of Plato, Plotinus, the Hermetica, and other forms of what has been called the perennial philosophy. This placed spirit or mind, or imagination, in the driver's seat, with the material world as a necessary but subordinate adjunct, occupying the bottom rung of the ontological ladder. It was to this tradition that Henry Corbin alluded when he spoke of the imagination's need for access to a cosmology structured similar to that of the traditional Oriental philosophies, with a plurality of universes arranged in ascending order, to keep it from losing itself in the will to power and its horrible productions. Now, this is where Lachman comes in a bit. You can see this sort of sarcastic quality. Such a cosmology seems light years away from a culture that embraces big bangs and the meaningless universes they create. This is the real point here, where it sees human beings as, at best, merely a higher form of animal, and applauds every expression of the animal in us, and at worst a stimulus response machine, pushed and pulled by the ineluctable forces of cause and effect, whether on a mechanical, genetic, or atomic level. Yet, as Raine reminds us, and remembering is essential here, this access lies within us and is there, ever ready for a call. All that is to say, humans have this sort of special innate gift or quality of the spiritual, and it sort of denigrates the idea of being animal and being human in a way. It even says that the material is the bottom rung of the ontological ladder. And I can see why that is, because material is just material, but then that seems to go against things like pantheism and a sacredness in everything. And it's very strange. I'm not sure I quite grasp it, because Raine was a romantic. She loved nature, but then she seems to suggest that the material is lower, and that humans are destined for an ascended purpose. But how can those two things be reconciled? I don't know. I've always struggled with this idea of ascendance and transcendence from the natural. And I talk about it in my sci-fi essay, and I talk about it in my sacred Christianity essay. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This is now going really quite into the concepts of the book. Hopefully that gives you an idea of what the lost knowledge of the imagination is. As far as negatives go, I would say that he does have a habit of run-on sentences. at certain points, especially near the end of the book, I noticed that he just starts putting concepts in, and unfortunately I got this impression that he just wanted to show his knowledge on certain things. I feel like there was less structure at the end of the book, and he just kept on piling on different concepts and different figures that are related to the learning of the imagination, but without fully explaining their sort of purpose in the sort of framework, I suppose. But with that said, that was the lost knowledge of the imagination. So hopefully you enjoyed the review. I definitely enjoyed reading this book, and I definitely got some things to think about, and it's a good jumping off point. I think you can think of it as a sort of compendium of knowledge that is, again, sort of lost but not forgotten, I think, and it's something that I'm really going to, I think I'll challenge myself with it. Just I might read more about Goethe, I might read more about Corbin and Barfield and others. It's been another Old and Word review. Thanks for watching, everyone. Till next time.